cold morning that we have, since we all moved to Alaska. No one knew it overnight. Of course, Alaska, it's like 34 degrees right now, so they got our weather. We have third. My name's Dan Kogan. I'm the president of Access Security. We're going to have, today, we're going to have two presentations. Matt Fredrickson, who's the director of IT at Council Rock School District, is going to do the first presentation, and that's going to be on cybersecurity and best practices on securing your network, as well as the overall that can be combined down to so much security is going onto your network. It's important to keep your security devices as secure as you would any other device that's on your network, as far as the cameras and the servers and so forth. And then I'll be talking about integration. I'll have a presentation that goes over integrating cameras, access control, intrusion alarm systems all together, and then also integrating third-party devices, and talking about two new concepts, not necessarily newer concepts that have come up, which is one's called PM and one's called PSIM solutions. So, and we'll go into those a little bit. But to start us off, I will introduce Matt Fredrickson here, and he will take us through our first presentation.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My name is Matt Fredrickson. I'm the IT director at Council Rock School District. I've been involved in IT for over 30 years. I apologize, I have a little bit of a cold, so I don't always sound this weird. But during my presentation, if you have any questions, please throw something at me, ask a question. If I get too boring, throw something at me. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit about the threat landscape, what's facing us as professionals out there in the world, what we have to look at, and not just in the work world, but the home world as well. Talk a little bit about networking. I'm going to assume you guys don't know anything about networking, so if you want to sleep during that portion, that's okay. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about security in terms of passwords and how everything kind of fits together. So James Roth in 2007 put out a study, and I kind of really appreciated the paper. It's like, you know, there are people who know that they've been victimized and people who don't know they've been victimized. If you run a network, if you manage a network, if you're involved in a network in today's environment, you've been compromised, you probably just don't realize it, or you've been compromised and you do realize it. I work in a K-12 environment, and I spent about 23 years in the private sector before moving over to the public sector. And what fascinated me as an IT manager and professional is that this is the first environment that I've been in that it's actively hostile. You have kids, when they hit middle school, get curious about computers, and from about the time they hit middle school till the time they graduate, they're trying to figure out how they can get around the security. And it's not that they have a malicious intent, they're just curious. So they do stupid things, because if you have kids or if you know kids, that's when they do things, and they're all usually stupid. Most of them grow out of that, but we all know adults who have it. So, there's a report that's put out every year by Verizon, and I don't know if you guys have seen this. It's called the Verizon Data Breach Report. And they're considered kind of the authority in terms of reporting this, because they have a lot of customers that they handle the information security background for. What they found is in 2014 that the largest threat was an external threat. About 6 years ago, the largest threat was internal. You were more worried about your internal employees than you were external. But today's world, you're really worried about external threats. The type of threat? Hacking. And hacking means compromising your system through means that aren't normal, like breaking your website or sending a phishing email and getting someone to click open a PDF document, which launches a program in the background, which gives the hacker access to the network. And that's the most common thing that's happening today. So I'd say probably 70% of your accesses to your network are going to be through a phishing scam. Someone's going to get an email, they're going to open a document, and unbeknownst to you is that document will actually launch a program in the background. And what that will do is that will secure itself on the machine. It'll make sure that it can start without the user's interaction. And then what happens is that will give that hacker access to the network. These are called APTs, Advanced Persistent Threats, because what's happening now is hackers aren't doing once and then running away. What they're doing is they're in for the long haul. What they want to do is they want to analyze your network. They want to find out what the cost is going to be for hacking your network and then how much money they can get from it. For example, think about it. In the school district, we used to store social security numbers for our kids. So Council Rock has 11,200 kids. If they got all of the addresses and social security numbers for those kids, they could sell those in the black market for about $5 a piece. It's a lot of money. Just in December alone, on one computer, we set up what's called a honeypot. Now, a honeypot is a computer that looks like it's a great hacking surface for a hacker. And if you have a large network, it's not uncommon to set up a couple of honeypots. And what this does is it draws the hacker's attention, and then you can see where they're coming from, what they're trying to do, and you can get a general idea of what's happening to your network. The largest source of attempts to access the network were from China. What's interesting is China teaches computer science. In their undergraduate classes, they'll deny this because they've denied this several times in the State Department, until you talk to someone who studied in China. They actually teach network penetration in their computer science class, and their targets in the United States. And you pass the class if you can penetrate the network. So what kind of data breaches are common? What do you see a lot? Well, in Target, in 2013, 40 million credit and debit cards were stolen. Does anyone know how that happened?
The HVAC contractors came in and switched out the credit card
Right.
devices.
There's a gentleman who works for a company called Black Hills Information Security who teaches a security course. There's an organization called SANS. I don't know if you've ever heard of them before, SANS.org. Big on security training, big on information regarding security. There's a gentleman there who teaches for them. He got hired by a box store, which I won't name, Walmart, and they asked him to find out how vulnerable their stores were. So he and his associate slung computer bags over their shoulders, walked into a Walmart, into the break room, and asked somebody, hey, where's the computer stuff? And one of the employees says, oh, it's over here. So they took them to the computer closet. They set up their computers and started scanning the network. And then one of the employees went and got the manager. The manager came and said, hey guys, what are you doing? I'm like, oh, we're here to do some updates on your network. And he said, okay, can I get you anything? So they got him some water and some snacks while they were working. What they did was they actually executed a code that opened all the registers at the same time. They did this 3 times before the manager said, hey, I think what you guys are doing is, you shouldn't be here. So that's how easy it is to walk into these big stores. No one questioned why they were there. Didn't question their identity. The biggest threat is actually from nation states like China, North Korea, and believe it or not, the former Russia is really bad too. Why they're going for this is because they make money. They make a lot of money. I have an example too. I'm going to go over in a minute and tell you just. For example, crypt blockers. Is everybody familiar with that? So what happens is you'll open, you'll get an email, you'll open a document, it won't make any sense to you, so you move on, you'll just delete it. And then what happens is about 15, 20 days later, you'll go to your computer and there'll be a screen that says, I've encrypted all the files on your system. If you pay me 20 Bitcoins, I'll send you a code and unlock your files. And I know people who have spent the money to get the files unencrypted. This actually happened in Council Rock. We had an administrator who did this, and she lost all of her files because I wasn't going to pay the money. We just wiped the machine and started from scratch, and she'd been there 30-some years, and she lost everything. It's extortion. But the first 6 months the Crypt Blocker was released, they made over $14 million. And they've estimated the revenue to date at over $1 billion. And this is extortion, and it's becoming very popular. And it's actually really easy to do. If you're interested in taking up this line of work, you can go to YouTube, watch a few videos, and create your own. So this is generally, right now, if you go to some of the black market sites, which you can't normally get to, and if you do go to, the FBI will show up at your door and ask you what you're doing. But an iTunes account, $8. A Groupon account, which blew my mind, $5 a piece. I mean, who would buy a Groupon account? No idea. Health records, you can get up to $10 per health record. Because what happens is you can take the information and then you can apply for funding for the federal government. If you've been reading the paper these days, you notice that they're up to over $1 billion now in tax returns that they've got refund checks to for people who don't exist, or people they filed refunds for people. Like you could file your return, and the IRS will come back and say, wait a minute, you've already filed your return, what are you doing? We already sent you a refund check. and then you discover that someone else had used your information, file a return and have a refund check. So an average company of 20 people can generate hundreds of dollars for one breach. And if you get 3 different breaches during the year, it's a lot of money. So the number one method is email, spamming and phishing. Does everybody know what phishing, when I say phishing, are you familiar with what that is? Okay. Compromised computers via the web. Has anybody ever heard of cross-site scripting? So you go to a website and you put in your information. If the website's not designed properly, you can actually put in code and get back a dump of the employee database. And it is amazing the number of large companies that still have websites out there that you can execute this code on. There's a database called ExploitDB. It's online, anybody can have access to it. So let's say you go to a website and you say, this looks interesting. It looks like they're running IIS. So you go to ExploitDB, type in IIS, and you get 4 or 5 pages of ways you can compromise a web system that's built on Internet Information Services. Insider threats is really starting to drop. We're not seeing a lot of that anymore. It's still a threat, but it's not as high as it was. If you're in a school district, it's huge. But if you're not in a school district, if you're just in a normal company like Dan's company, he's probably not too worried about insider threats. GM, insider threats is still probably an issue with them. But the larger the company, the higher the risk. And lost or stolen hardware. One of our employees recently went to the circus this past week and she lost her phone. And I said to her, I said, well, did you report it? She goes, yeah, on the way back I called the phone company, disconnected the account. I said, well, tell me you didn't do banking on your phone. She goes, yeah, I did. Why? And I said, because you need to call and change all of your passwords for your bank accounts. Because what happens is there's a software package out there now, it's really cool. You can take a cell phone, plug it into your laptop, run the software package, and creates a clone of your phone. Now, when you have your banking app, it says that it's secure. But it also says that it needs to access the SIM card and the memory on your phone, just like every other application on your phone. So I would never recommend doing banking on your phone. Use your phone for games and phone calls, and keep track of your calendar. But don't ever do banking on a portable device. Just my. It's funny, she told me yesterday that she called the bank, and they were just getting ready to call her because they started to notice some unusual activity. Someone was trying to access her account because they probably cloned her phone. So, take a minute. How many passwords do you have? Think about the number of systems that you access on a weekly basis, on a daily basis. Some of these are probably work email, home email. I know you guys don't use Facebook, but your wife or spouse probably does, right? LinkedIn, your work network, SCADA systems, management systems, banking, insurance. Now, if you're like 90% of the people out there, you like to keep things simple, so you use the same password for every system, right? That's a bad thing. You shouldn't do that. Every system should have its own password. And the reason that I say that is because if that password gets compromised, you only have to worry about one system. If you have the same password for all the systems, then you're putting yourself at risk. For example, I have a LinkedIn account. On that LinkedIn account, I have my resume. So it talks about all the places that I've ever worked, talks about my experience with technology, talks about the technology I'm using at Council Rock right now. If I was a hacker and I was looking to compromise the Council Rock's network, I would look at that, and that would give me a general idea of the technology that I'm using at Council Rock. Okay? We'll talk about that a little bit later, but that's called part of reconnaissance. Okay. So I'm going to talk a minute about a network. How many of you are network people? Oh, only one. You can sleep. This actual diagram is actually typical of most networks today, whether you're a small business or a large business. So you have a bunch of computers, you have servers, and they're connected to switches. Pretty simple, you guys have, you've seen the ports going on your computers. And they're necessary for you guys to talk to each other. Then you usually have some access points. They're hooked up to the switches as well. You can have a PBX system, which might be connected to the public network, but it might be doing VoIP now, over voice over IP. You have the internet, and then you may or may not have remote users, and you have a firewall. So actually, each point on the network is actually a point of potential compromise or access to your network from someone who you don't want to be in your network. What's really interesting is, have you guys ever heard the term of war dialing? That's when someone just starts calling phone numbers and looking for a modem to respond. Because believe it or not, you can actually hack a network through a modem. And that's what Mitnick did a long time ago. You guys have heard of Mitnick, right? He's a big hacker. Man, am I old. Anyway, what's really interesting nowadays is that the hacking PBXs kind of went to the wayside because it was so, everyone became aware of it, and they put security in place to stop it. But now with the advent of VoIP, which is tunneling voice over the internet, it's starting to pick back up again. What's really fascinating is, my dad worked for the state of Virginia in the communications department. And one year, he was involved in a 14-month investigation because hackers had hacked their PBX and were making international calls, but they were also selling time for those international calls. In 1 month, they had a phone bill for like $2.5 million of international calls because someone had figured out how to get into the PBX and they would give the code to people and they could use that to access it to make calls. So you could call anywhere you wanted and it wouldn't cost you any money at all. And that's the danger of voice over IP, is because there aren't a lot of limitations on that like there are with the normal network, voice network. It's possible for you to get in and hack systems. Another area of compromise is a wireless network. We'll talk a little bit later about monitoring equipment, but so I work in a K-12 school district, and it's not uncommon for teachers to get frustrated because I'm not responding fast enough to their needs. Council Rock covers 72 square miles. We have 18 buildings, and there are 10 of us in the IT department. And on a daily basis, we support about 14,000 users. So no, we're not going to respond instantly when you have an issue. Not uncommon for them to bring in their own equipment and plug it in the network and try to get it to work. I know that happens in the business world too. I had a conversation with the CIO at Johnson & Johnson a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about structure of IT departments and response to IT departments. And I said one of the greatest challenges that IT directors face in any organization is the fact that when they can't provide a service that their users need, those users are going to look elsewhere. And that's when you create the risk to your organization. For example, Dropbox. A lot of people love Dropbox, especially if you're crazy enough to use a Mac. Sorry, I'm very opinionated. Dropbox is one of the biggest security holes out there. It is so easy to hack. It is so easy to compromise. If you're sharing files in Dropbox, you might as well just put them on the front page of the newspaper because anybody can access them. There is no security in Dropbox. So we were talking about the fact that he's seen a proliferation of people using Dropbox. And I'm like, Google Drive, which Google indexes everything anyway, and that's not really private, is better than Dropbox. SkyDrive from Microsoft is actually even better still because they don't care what you put out there. But Google makes the revenue on the information that you have in your files. They sell it to advertisers. That's how they make the money. So even though they tell you that it's private, it's not private. They index it. Your firewall. Most people think I've got a firewall, I'm safe. The firewall is kind of like locking your door when you leave your house. It's going to keep the honest people honest, but it's not going to stop the dishonest people. If you have a firewall, check and find out when the last time the software on that was updated. If it wasn't yesterday, it's too old. Servers are great in terms of being compromised because what happens if you compromise a server, you have access to the whole network generally because everybody in your organization generally needs access to that server. We're going to talk about authentication and identification in a few seconds. Any questions about networking? So how do you authenticate when you're logging onto a computer? Well, there's local user tables. If your computer never connects to a network, if you go to Best Buy and buy a computer and take it home and don't ever hook it up to anything, it's still going to ask you to create an account when you open it up. That stores that information locally. If you're in a network, chances are that you have a network username and password. And that's probably stored in LDAP, which is a lightweight directory access protocol. Sounds pretty impressive, but it's really just a directory of usernames, or Active Directory, which is Microsoft's implementation of LDAP. And what that does is that stores your name and your password, and it stores an identifier for you And that's how the network administrators can grant access to resources through that username and password. It's actually a token that says, this token is okay to get here, but this token is not okay to get here. Some people store usernames and passwords in databases. It's dangerous, because if someone accesses the database, now they have all your usernames and passwords. There's a concept called encryption at rest and encryption in traffic. So in other words, if I'm storing your password in a database, it should be encrypted. If it's traveling across the network, it should be encrypted, and then unencrypted when it gets to the workstation. If those two things don't happen, if it's not encrypted at rest, it's not encrypted in traffic, someone could actually compromise it. You could walk into just about any bank, any branch bank, and walk along the wall and you'll see network drops. Because you know how banks like to rearrange things all the time. I have a friend that does network penetration testing for a living. And he was hired by the CIO of a local bank to test the security in some of the branch offices. So he would go in and sit down, and someone would say, "Can I help you?" He says, "Well, I'm waiting for my wife." And then he would just reach over and plug his laptop into one of those drops. They were all active. He was able to get on their network very easily, scan the network, get a good idea of what the computers were, how things were set up, because all those ports were active. So if he had really wanted to push it, he could get into a database. If you go into a Target or a Walmart, all of the point of sale systems are set up to talk to a central server, especially at Target, and that central server syncs up on a regular basis with headquarters. But it stores a local copy of everything. The point of sale systems generally store a local copy of everything. So if there's a break in connectivity, they don't have to shut the store down, they can continue to ring you out. I used to work for a company called Sassy in Bristol, and we wrote point of sale software. And that was one of the biggest requirements was, if we lose connectivity, we still need to be able to ring people out, so we store the transactions locally. If you walked into a Target and walked away with the server or a point of sale system, you would have transaction records for that entire day. And it stores all that stuff in a database, which is not encrypted at rest. And then there are people out there that hard code. If you buy a router at Walmart or Staples and you take it home, you hook it up, it has a default username and password. You would be amazed. You know what the #1 password is in the United States today? Password. There's actually a website. Have you ever heard of Google hacking? If you have a couple hours and you're bored, open Google and type in Google hacking. It'll take you to a website where actually you can search Google's database using keywords like URL or different things. And if you put in webcams, you'd be amazed at the number of webcams out there that people set up to still have the default username and password. And you can actually watch what's going on in their offices, and they don't even realize it. They set it up so that they could access it from home, but they don't change any passwords, so you can get in and see what's going on in their offices. So in 1984, the FBI was asked to do a report on what makes up good computer password complexity. You'll never guess what they came back with. Your password has to be 8 characters, and it has to be mixed up with numbers and letters. Do you know how hard it is to break a password with 8 characters with numbers and letters? It takes about 12 seconds on an average computer. That was good for 1984. If your password is at least 14 characters and contains at least 2 spaces, it will take, on average, 3 trillion years to hack your password. So, you're all going to go back and change your passwords, right? What I suggest is that you use a passphrase. I love my dog. And instead of substituting the 0 for O in dog, put an exclamation point at the end. Okay. Put a 1 in for the O, for love. Do something like that. So you're going to meet complexity. It's going to have a number in it. It's going to have a special character in it. But as soon as you add spaces, you can found the tools that are used by hackers to compromise passwords. If you're thinking about security from a posture, one of the things that you should look at is you should enforce password complexity on the desktops. You should also do something with log files. Everything that happens on your computer is logged. Why is that? Do you know why that is? Somebody has to support it. And the reason the logs were created was not because they were concerned about security, they were concerned about what's going on in the computer and how do I make things better. But there's a lot of information in logs. If you use Microsoft Windows products, hopefully no one's on XP anymore, because if you are, you should just pull out a company check and sign on your bank account to me now. That'll just save you a lot of effort. Windows 7, Windows 8, which by the way I love from a security standpoint. Those programs are awesome. If you have a Mac or if you're using Linux, they all have log files. And if you Google the log files and security, you can find out which events are important. If you've ever looked at Windows, has 5 basic log files that they create on a regular basis. And there are thousands of entries in those log files. And it is unwieldy to try to figure out what's going on a machine looking at those. But there are programs that you can get which will scan out particular codes. For example, an advanced persistent threat, someone's compromised your machine, and now they're trying to figure out what passwords are to get into other machines. They know that if they try 3 attempts, they're going to lock an account, and that's going to throw up a flag to someone and so on and so on. But if they try that logging in with a bad password and they do it once every 15 minutes, they're probably not going to lock the account. But that gets logged. So if you see that Tom Jones has tried to log in 250 times over an 8-hour period, you probably have somebody trying to hack your system. You can find that in log files. HIDS stands for Host Intrusion Detection System. What that does is that actually analyzes your computer and looks at what's normal for your computer, and then it helps identify things that aren't normal, like someone trying to access the network on a regular basis. It looks for patterns. Believe it or not, malware, all this stuff has a pattern, and what HIDS do is they're trained to look for those types of patterns and they can alert you. They're better if they're tied into a larger system and feeding the information up to a larger system, because then it gives you a better picture of what's going on in your network. The last thing you can do on a computer for security is called whitelisting. Right now, if you wanted to install a program on your laptop, if it's not locked down by your IT department, you probably can do that. There's also a nice little place under on Windows, particularly called Apps Roaming, which you can read and write, and that's where a lot of hackers love to write their programs to, because you as a user can read and write to that directory. So you could actually install an application in that directory and run it on your computer, and your IT department would be pissed off because it's locked down. You shouldn't be able to do that, but you can. What whitelisting does is it's a list of applications that can run on your desktop, and that's it. So if your IT department hasn't thought it through and you're trying to run Excel and it's not whitelisted, Excel won't run. That is the best way to lock down your computer. It is also very man-intensive in terms of man-hours, because there are a lot of applications out there. It takes anywhere from 6 to 8 months before you get to a point where you've identified all the applications that you want to learn on the computer. On a server, surprisingly enough, same type of things would apply. You want to look at passwords, you want to look at how it's storing the passwords on the machine. For example, physical access is really important. If I can get to a server, I guarantee you I can get to the password file, and I guarantee you I can tell you what the usernames and passwords are for users on that server. Because what I can do is I can take a thumb drive, and I can reboot that computer to that thumb drive, and I can make a mirror image of the server, take that back to my computer. I can boot whatever it's storing. If it's a Windows machine, it's a SAM database. Active Directory, it's still called a SAM database. Linux, it has a password shadow file. It would take me 2 or 3 days, and I would start to get a list of passwords. On servers, logs are critical for security. If you're looking at a security system, you want something. If you're looking for tools to monitor logs, there's a product out there called Splunk. It's actually called Splunk. It used to be called Splunking for Data. They thought that was too long, so they changed it to Splunk. Awesome program, it's free, for up to 500 megs worth of data a day. What you can do is you can put your log files to it, and there are utilities you can download and install, especially for Windows, and it'll give you reports, human readable reports on activity that's going on in your environment. Great product, highly recommend. There's another program out there called OSSIM, really complicated to set up, but what it does is it actually will allow you to install a HID on top of, there's a commercial product called Alien Vault, which is a commercial version of that. And what it does, it allows you to install the HIDs on the servers, and it collects that data, and it gives you an awesome report. The dashboard is phenomenal. And it tells you 5 different attack vectors where you need to be concerned about what's happening on your network. Network security, we could spend probably a month talking about network security. I'm just going to hit high level. If you don't have a firewall, you should. Even at home, you should have a firewall. What a firewall does, it stops the bad stuff from coming in, most of it, but it doesn't stop you from getting out. Not a bad idea to have an IDS or an IPS. IDS stands for Intrusion Detection System or Intrusion Prevention System. A prevention system will actually stop the traffic. IDS will just tell you it's happening, but an IPS will actually alter your network traffic and stop it from coming in. If you have a Cisco ASA, you can get those built into it and actually have your ASA talk back to Cisco's center in California, where they update every 4 hours information they've collected from around the world on threats. And it's an awesome system, it really is. But most of your firewalls, Ironport, SonicWall, all of those have that type of capability into them these days. NetFlow, does anybody know what NetFlow is? Okay. All of your switch traffic, if you have, well, I'm getting really geeky now. So if you have a switch, it's either managed or unmanaged. If it's a managed switch, there's a chance that it actually creates a log file too of everything that happens inside the switch. In the world of Cisco switches, it's called NetFlow. In the world of HP, it's called IPFlow. There's actually a standard before the Standards Board. It's been there for 3 years now. They can't agree on the name of it. They want to call it NetFlow, but they don't want to call it NetFlow because that's Cisco's name. So they're fighting about what they're going to call it. But eventually it'll be a standard. And what NetFlow traffic does is anything that happens on your network, you'll know about. So if you have a way to look at that information, if you're looking for a free tool, there's a company called Manage Engine that puts out a NetFlow analyzer, and it'll take NetFlow data, and it'll take IPFlow data, and it's free for up to one device. So if you have a large network, feed your switches into a aggregator and send the aggregator to that, and you'll be able to look at the data and see what's happening. If you have websites, you should do a regular audit of the websites. Make sure that they're patched and up to date, because if you don't, it's very possible, very potential that they can be attacked. In fact, you should have a patch management process in place where you're doing patch management regularly. Now, those of us that work in IT know that that's a full-time job. Every Tuesday, Microsoft puts out patches and releases, and every time you install them, you crash half your system. So, patch management system, you have to have a sandbox environment where you can apply the patch, see if it's going to crash something before you apply it. Or do what we do, wait a month. Are you at risk? Yes, but if you wait a month, you're okay. Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to talk about SIEM. SIEM is a security information event management. That's one of those buzzwords that's been out for a while. What a SIEM does is it takes all these different sources of information, pulls them together in one place. So instead of having 8 dashboards to go to every day when you come in, you have one place you can go to. Alien Vault is a SIEM. It takes information from a bunch of different sources and brings it together. SCADA. SCADA is Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition. This is such a cool word. I stumbled upon it a couple of years ago. We have 2 types of systems in our district. We have Johnson Controls and we have Siemens. Because we're a school district, we have to go out to bid whenever we bid HVAC systems or any of the building control systems. Unfortunately, the way that our business manager has interpreted the law, we can't say it has to be a Johnson's Control or it has to be Siemens. But we can say that a predominant number of our systems are Johnson's or Siemens, so we get a Johnson's or Siemens. SCADA is actually what you refer to the endpoints out there, the ones that are on the, when they come through and they commission the system and the fans and the boilers and the set points and all that stuff. Those are all SCADA controls. When those were built, originally, they weren't built, they didn't even know what a network was. You had to walk up to your laptop, plug in the device, set it, and go away. And then they said, this stinks, we should build networking, and we said, all right, we'll put a network port on it and talk IP. But they're still not thinking security. I did a rough scan on CouncilRock, don't tell anyone this, and half of our systems still have the default password on it. So if I wanted to be nasty, I could get in. And you know what, a kid can bring in a laptop from home, use the same utility, plug into my network, I'll stop them, but if I didn't stop them, they could scan the network and they could go in and they could set the temperature on the boiler to 100 degrees. They could do that. And this is the biggest attack surface as far as the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Has anybody heard of InfraGard? InfraGard is a organization that was set up by the FBI. It's a joint venture between the FBI and private sector organizations and public sector organizations. Anyone can join. You can apply for it. It takes about 8 months for your application to get approved. But they put out notices all the time. And one of the biggest attack services that they're concerned about is the electrical companies and the transportation companies, because they use a lot of these systems and they're not really bent on security. every year in Boston, they run an exercise. You can get the results from the exercise in 2012 online and read them. It's fascinating. What they do is they simulate an attack. And they have all these power and utility companies come in and they say, okay, this is how we would respond. It's a tabletop exercise. They don't really attack the network. But it's just interesting to see how far they've come, because this used to really worry me, is that someone would hack into our, power plant or just our power grid and shut down the power. I'm not as worried anymore because they have spent a lot of money. It's still a concern because any system can be compromised, but it's just a lot harder than it used to be. So how does an attack work? Well, the first thing they do is recon. DNS stands for Domain Name System. So when you type in like Google, Internet doesn't know what Google is. They translate that to an IP address, and that's how they send you to a server. You guys probably knew that. If I was going to hack a network, there's actually documentation. NIST has an excellent document on how to do a penetration testing. And there's a couple of frameworks online that you can get. For the pen test framework is actually probably the best, because it actually outlines not only each of these steps, but it tells you what tools to use to do them. So if you're interested in learning how to hack networks, you can learn everything online. You do recon, DNS, web, you want to find out about something. I took a course on penetration testing, and I chose Home Depot, because I kind of like to hang out at Home Depot. And I was amazed at the information I was able to gather just in the recon fix. Like, I can tell you just about the top 7 or 8 managers in the IT department, who they are. I can tell you one likes to knit, to hang out on knitting forums. And what's really cool is what you can do, this is part of the social engineering, is you can find out that they like to knit, go to the forums where they hang out, start talking to them online, get some information from them, then call Home Depot's help desk and say, hey man, my password, I'm in the field, I need to change. You'll be able to give them enough information to convince the help desk that you are who that person is. They'll change the password, boom, you're in the system. That's social engineering. It's not uncommon for, this is really fascinating. There's actually a toolkit out there called Social Engineering Toolkit. It's a Linux-based tool, but what it does is you can actually craft emails to send to employees. They'll respond, and they'll tell you who's responded. It's designed to help you teach your employees what not to do. And it's free. All the stuff is free. Pretty cool. Discovery and probing, that's when you actually get into the scanning and the wireless. Part of my phase, I just kind of wanted to see how vulnerable Home Depot was. Their IT director's not happy with me because I found a couple of the websites that were wide open. And so I sent him an email because I just thought that was the right thing to do. And I got a very nasty email in response. I said, okay, whatever. Vulnerability assessment. If you have a network and you're responsible, you should have this done every 3 to 5 years. We had one done at Council Rock. It cost us $35,000. Best investment we ever made. Because if you're in charge of the network, you know how your network is built, you know how it's structured, you know how it works. What you don't know is the stuff that you don't know. And the way to find out what you don't know is to have somebody from the outside come in and take a look and say, hey, these are all the things that I found. And once your network has been scanned in terms of vulnerability, now it's time to exploit it. Passwords, backdoors, getting into our phone systems, wireless, physical security. I'm amazed at how easy it is to get into some places. My wife doesn't like to go with me anymore because I'll look to see what cameras are. I was in a Target in Virginia, and they had the access points up on the ceiling, and they had the IP address, and they had the password. To make it easy for people to get in to the network. So I talked to the store manager, and I'm like, you probably shouldn't do that. Oh, the IT department did that. I don't know if they do that. Oh, okay. So this is common stuff. And Dan will go into a little bit more. You guys are obviously going to talk, security. It's important, but physical security is often overlooked. You put a card reader on the door. Okay, we're good. What happens if somebody's walking right behind you and you get in? That happens all the time. How many of you have an incident response plan? Yeah, I didn't either a while ago. So what happens if you get a phone call? Hey, this is your ISP. We provide you your internet service, and you've got a bot out there, and it's slammed on the internet. We're going to have to shut you down. You need to fix it. What would you do? How would you respond to that phone call? What are the things that you would do? If you haven't thought about it, you should. Once again, SANS organization has a document on how to prepare an incident response plan. NIST has an excellent document. I don't know if you guys have ever been to the NIST website. Once again, it's free. They have all these documents and all this stuff, a lot of stuff will put you right to sleep. But they have an incident response planning book. It's about this thick. It's a PDF. It's a good read. Not really, but it's a good read. So these phases are a preparation. You have to prepare for an incident. If you never thought about it, you're not prepared. You have to have support from the top level, because if you have an incident, you've got to know what you can and what you can't do. Like, you can't walk in and confiscate all the computers in the computer lab. That's, especially in an educational environment, that would have a bad effect. You got to know how to identify it. If you don't have the in-house resources to do this, there are a lot of companies out there that do this for a living. A couple of them in our area, E+, they're located out of Pottstown. They've got an excellent response group. Integral One out of Allentown, they've got an excellent response group. They're actually partnered with Mandiant, which is one of the largest information security firms in the world. There's a company in Ballackinwood called ASK Technologies. They've got a partnership with Presidio. So there's a lot of good companies that can help you if you don't know what to do. Once an incident's occurred, you got to contain it. You have to eradicate it. The most important thing is recovery. So I highly recommend you take a look at this documentation just to get an idea of what to expect. I'm just going to run through these slides relatively quickly, because this is really, I think, important in terms of information security, is knowing how to react. Okay? So you have to document everything. There's a good possibility that the incident that's occurred, if you're going to want to seek legal action, if you haven't documented it, it didn't happen. Talk to a lawyer, they'll tell you that. If it wasn't documented, it didn't happen. Okay? Find somebody to help walk through this process with you. You don't want to do it by yourself. You want someone there as a witness. You want them to take notes separate from your notes so that you can compare them. Okay? This is really critical. Analyzing the evidence to confirm that an incident has occurred. Everything that happens on a computer creates an event. Only a certain combination of events actually equate to an incident. You have to notify the appropriate people. I had an organization where I had an individual who got access to the network, was analyzing the database schema just to see what they could do, and notified the president of the company that they had done this because they were curious and wanted to do a report. And the president of the company got really upset and fired the employee, and the employee came back and there was a lawsuit and eventually got the job back. But you have to notify people in the organization, and they have to know what to do. HR has to be notified, because if you're going to terminate an employee, they need to know about it. You've got to have grounds to terminate an employee. Notify external organizations. This is a big if. For example, if you've been compromised and you notify the police, they're going to start treating it as a crime scene. They're either going to tell you, we can't do anything for you. I don't get that a lot anymore. Now they're going to start treating it as a crime scene, and then you actually become an extension of law enforcement if you're involved in it, because they are going to ask you to do things. So, did I mention documentation? You have to document it. Stop the incident if it's in progress. For example, if someone's using a machine in your environment to blast other machines, go ahead and disconnect the network. Take it offline. Preserve evidence. If this is important to you, so at Council Rock, I have workstations and computer labs. If I have an incident on a workstation, I go right to the remediation, I reimage the machine. I don't do anything else, because it's not worth it to me in terms of time, unless I'm concerned that a larger incident occurred. So I'll go out and check the logs. And if there's no evidence that this person was scanning the network and trying to access our databases and student information system, I just reimage it. We have people who open attachments from people they don't know. Happens all the time. I can't tell you how many workshops I've had, how many emails I've sent out. If you don't know the person, I don't care if it says you've won $1 million, don't open the document. It happens every single day. So what I've started telling the technicians to do, image the machine. Takes the machine offline for about 4 hours. The person has no machine for 4 hours. That's painful to them. They're going to stop opening the documents. It's not disruptive to the business because it's a necessary response, but it's painful enough to them that they'll stop doing it. If you can identify what happened, that's good. If you can't, if you just know there's something wrong, that's okay, just move on. You need to confirm that operations have been restored to normal. You're not usually the person who can do that. The person who uses the machine is the person who can do that. So you need them to tell you. And then create a final report. That's for historical purposes. You can go back and say, hey, this happened before. So this is how basically most people feel at the end of my presentation. Really, so these are some of the things you should do. Use complex passwords. Please use a different password for every system you access. Have procedures in place. Take an integrated approach to security. Security isn't just computers anymore. It's not video cameras. It's not door access. Everything's talking to everything, and that's a good thing. That's not a bad thing, because it gives you a better picture. Establish a baseline. Know what normal is. If you don't know what normal is, you don't know what abnormal is. Have a good security policy in place. Training is important for your employees. I can't stress that enough. You should have some processes in place to alert you to variances. Okay? You really need to know what normal is. And I've talked an awful lot. Any questions? Yes, sir.
I read something the other day where, as opposed to trying to prevent hackers from entering, they want to allow them in to trap them. Are you familiar with that technology?
It's called honeypot.
Okay.
It's called a honeypot, and it's becoming very popular. If you, for example, the most common type of honeypot is you have web servers that service your user community. And a lot of times what you have is clustered web servers. So you have 3 or 4 web servers, and the user doesn't know that there's 3 or 4 servers. A hacker would. So on one of those servers, you create some things that make it look like they can get into it. Say you don't have the latest version of IIS. Well, users don't go to that. You don't really usually direct people to that website, so it kind of looks like it's maybe a test website or something. That's a honeypot. So you're creating an environment that looks very appealing to hackers and says, you know what, instead of having to spend 30 hours to get in this network, I'll only have to spend 10. So yeah, it's a common approach. It's dangerous, because if you don't have it set up right, you're letting hackers into your network. So it has to be in a DMZ, and you have to have everything set up. But yeah, there's actually, if you're familiar with Linux images, there's actually a Harvester distribution, and it's full of honeypots. It's designed specifically for creating an environment and then tracking the information for you to make it easier for you to figure out. Like that one slide I showed about China, that was pulled from a honeypot distribution that I had on the web. It told me that this one. So what I've done is I called my ISP and I said, look, I know I'm an educational institution. I don't care. I don't want any traffic from China coming to my network. Block it all. And my network usage went down significantly. So yeah, it was amazing how much I was getting slammed from China. I just said, block it, I don't care. I've only had one person complain that they couldn't get to a website they wanted to. And she's from China, and it's a legitimate excuse. I said, wait till you get home. I said, I'm sorry, I can't help it.
Is there a way you can get through from China without actually divulging you're coming from China?
Yes, but it's a lot harder to do. You have to have proxies, and there are a lot of proxies. The number one country with proxies is Russia, and that's the next country on block. And that's really good, because there's a large portion of the population of Council Rock that are from the Baltic states and Russia. And I know I'm going to piss them off when I block Russia, but that's next.
I was offered a thumb drive I could stick to my computer that when I went out to the internet, it wouldn't broadcast my IP address, and I didn't really know where it was coming from. Have you ever heard of anything like that?
Not on a thumb drive.
It was some devices that was made of metal, it was some special high security.
I'm not familiar with that. Okay.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
We'll take like a quick 15-minute break if there's still food out, if anyone wants to get some water, coffee, and so forth, and we're going to switch over to the other presentation, and then we'll start back up and we'll go through the integration.
I would go home, I'm always doing my banking on my animals. I'm doing.
My back, I do the same thing. Back to the You remember, they can figure it out.
Exactly.
Probably stop.